Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast, where we provide you with your weekly diagnosis of everything fantasy football. Whether it's season-long leagues, dynasty, DFS, or sometimes even IDP, we got you covered all year long. Let's do it. Let's get to it. Welcome into the Fantasy Football Diagnostics Podcast. It is Tuesday, November 5th, 2024. I'm your host, Jon Jeune, at the real Jon J _FF on Instagram and X. Hopefully y'all are doing well. Hopefully you guys had a great weekend. And I am back to host this show live in person. Last time it was a live show. I just wasn't here in person with y'all. So if you were here, you knew the difference. But anyway, happy to be back in our regular format. Today is our waiver show, so we're going to go through some of the guys to target at the different positions and hopefully help you guys get ready for the fantasy football playoffs because it's closer than you think. We're approaching week 10. We've got like 5 weeks left. 5 weeks left until the 5 regular season weeks left until the fantasy playoffs. So everything we do right now is heightened just a little bit more. So hopefully y'all are positioned in at the top of your leagues where maybe you're getting that first or second, that first round bye, or maybe you are in the middle of the pack now and you're trying to get to those fantasy playoffs, right? Trying to secure a spot. Going to be willing to do everything we can here to help you guys out. Obviously, if you guys have any questions, any trade questions, drop questions, feel free to reach out. But, this is the waiver show. So, want to jump into that. Definitely just make sure you comment, like, subscribe on YouTube, Twitch, X, Instagram, wherever you're watching. Make sure you hit the follow button on the account as well. And also make sure if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, that you're subscribed there as well and making sure you get the notifications whenever a new show drops. Thanksgiving is in a few weeks. So we've been trying to think through what that episode is going to look like, what the schedule is going to look like, because it is going to be a little bit different. We are like 3 weeks away, but, just going to give what I'm thinking right now is that we'll have the regular waiver show on Tuesday, the 26th. And then on Wednesday, the 27th, I'll do a live stream at sometime in the later part of the day, the evening, maybe sometime between 5 and 7. Is when it'll start, but it'll just cover every single game for that week slate of games there, including the Thanksgiving games all the way through to Sunday night or Monday Night Football. So, we'll do our regular matchup show. It'll have a lot more games. The episode will probably be a little bit longer. Obviously, there will be starts of the week in there as well. So it'll be, kind of a longer episode, and then that'll go out on podcast platform most likely that same night. So, you'll have, basically all weekend to consume it. It's going to be a long episode. If you want to sit here and watch it live and hang out with me for about an hour plus, then, feel more than welcome to do that. If not, then obviously you could obviously catch the show later as it'll, obviously be aired on YouTube and X and Twitch and Instagram, or you can listen to it, on podcast platform as well. So that'll be the plan for Thanksgiving. I'll obviously give another update as we get closer to that, but let's just jump into the waiver show. And so week 10, we've got 4 teams on bye: the Cleveland Browns, the Green Bay Packers, the Las Vegas Raiders, and the Seattle Seahawks. So, obviously there are some relatively, big players, big names in there. So gotta find a way to adjust this week and get this thing going. So starting with the quarterback position, and obviously it's going to be Bo Nix that leads us off here. Denver quarterback Bo Nix available in 66% of Yahoo leagues. He was just fine against Baltimore. Didn't have the big game he had the week before, but he continues to be a very solid rookie, thanks especially to his willingness to use his legs. He's fifth at the position in rushing yards and tied for third at the position with rushing in rushing touchdowns. Not to mention, he is the quarterback 13 in fantasy points per game, and that's a list that includes Pittsburgh quarterback Justin Fields. So technically, he is a QB1 if you look at all the uh, quarterbacks that are playing right now. So I think he needs to be rostered in more than 66% of leagues. If you're the Dak Prescott manager and you just lost a quarterback, I think, Bo Nix makes a ton of sense. Jordan Love on bye. Again, Bo Nix makes a ton of sense. He does play Kansas City this week, Kansas City's been a very solid defense. But Bo Nix with his legs, the fact that he's willing to use his legs, we even saw him catch a touchdown pass this past weekend. He's finding ways to give us a safe, fantasy floor here. So definitely, again, I've been a big advocate of Bo Nix, and I'm going to continue to do that as we move forward. Moving on to the next guy I've been an advocate of since his rookie year, but been advocating for a lot more recently as well. That's LA Chargers quarterback Justin Herbert. He's available in 56% of Yahoo leagues. Herbert now has 3 straight games with over 279 passing yards, and now gets a Tennessee defense this week that's middle of the road in terms of a matchup here for opposing quarterbacks. But it's the upcoming schedule for Herbert that really gets me excited. He's got matchups against Cleveland, Cincinnati, Baltimore, Atlanta, Kansas City, and then Tampa Bay in that first round of the fantasy playoffs. So if you need help at quarterback, I think Justin Herbert needs to be in consideration for a roster spot for you. Moving on to the next guy at the position, that is New York Jets quarterback Aaron Rodgers, available in 57% of Yahoo leagues. Obviously, we talked about all 3 of these guys last week, but we talked about Rodgers last week as well. And that's now back-to-back solid finishes for Rodgers. And he now gets to go on the road to face an Arizona Cardinals defense who, coming into week 9, allowed the 9th most fantasy points to opposing quarterbacks. So with Jordan Love, Geno Smith on bye this week, obviously the injury to Dak Prescott, I find it hard to see Rodgers finishing outside the top 12 this week. Moving on to the last guy at this position that we'll talk about, that's Pittsburgh quarterback Russell Wilson. He's available in 84% of Yahoo leagues. He's back from the bye week, but he comes back to face a Washington defense that, as we've talked about, no longer seems like a cakewalk. But after that, he's got a string of matchups against Baltimore, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland, and Philadelphia. The Philadelphia one is not so great, but then he gets Baltimore again. So assuming things stay the way they are, you feel good about those matchups. Maybe this is a situation where you can, pick up 2 of these guys and you can stream off your bench, right? Because as you get closer to the fantasy playoffs, we got to start kind of like looking ahead. And this is for more of those managers that are, sitting in a playoff spot right now. You're the 1 of the 2 seed. You're kind of playing with house money a little bit. You can look ahead to some of these matchups, start getting your quarterback situation sorted, unless you have one of the top guys that you're not looking to stream the position. But if you are streaming the position, maybe you're looking at 2 of these guys, looking at their matchups ahead and saying, hey, you know what, in 1 week I can start Justin Herbert, and another week I can start Russell Wilson, so on and so forth. So I would start, looking at some of those things as we get closer to week 14 or week 15 here. Moving on to the running back position. And so there's no running backs, no singular running back to go over this week. But I'm going to just highlight some of the backups some of the backup running backs that are below that 50% threshold in terms of rostership that I think should be considered for a roster spot at the end of your bench here. And as we always talk about every week, just because I'm saying you should pick somebody up doesn't mean you have to hold them on your roster throughout the entire week. Injuries happen at the running back position, so sometimes I like to have those guys on my roster as the game is being played, and if nothing happens, I will drop them and pick up somebody else, right? Like, a guy I often talk about, and I'll probably bring up again today, is Jalen Wright. I pick him up at least once a week, near the end of the week after waivers have cleared, and I've kind of like finalized everything on my roster in terms of what I need to do. I'll pick up Jalen Wright, and then after the Dolphins play, I will drop him and go pick up another backup running back. And so these guys don't have to be stuck on your roster unless obviously you're playing in a league format or a league platform, a platform, fantasy football platform that does not allow you to drop players after they've played. I know sometimes that's a league setting, but ESPN doesn't allow you to do that. Sleeper, depending on how the league is configured, may not allow you to do that. Yahoo's default is to allow you to drop players after they've played. So, if you're playing in Yahoo leagues, this is something that I'm doing constantly. So definitely would give that advice here. So some guys that are available in more than 50% of Yahoo leagues at the running back position, in no particular order really here. First guy I'm going to talk about, Pittsburgh running back Jaylen Warren, available in 53% of Yahoo leagues. He's a guy that I feel like should be rostered regardless of, what the he's maybe one of those guys I would push higher than the end of my bench, right? Because he's a guy that he doesn't necessarily need an injury here to be considered fantasy valuable, right? He's a guy that he might have a role here, especially as we talked about last week leading up to the Giants game, the game against the Giants there with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Uh, Russell Wilson in this offense, he lifts the offense as a whole, right? So, for me, the way I look at it is there's more opportunities in the passing game here for a guy like Jaylen Warren, who we know excels as a pass down back. So there's a world where he actually has a role outside of an injury to Najee Harris. And so for me, Jaylen Warren probably is going to have a little bit more. I'm going to prioritize him a little bit more in terms of adding him to my roster and not letting him go unless I'm in a dire situation or you're obviously loaded at the end of your bench. Another guy, a guy who does need an injury here, and it looks like he was involved, but is sitting behind a guy who can be injured at times. That's Minnesota running back Cam Akers, available in 94% of Yahoo leagues. Akers seemed to supplant Ty Chandler there for the backup running back behind Aaron Jones in Minnesota. So we obviously know Aaron Jones. He's been dealing with a hip and a hamstring and a back issue, I think, as well too. So Aaron Jones is a little banged up. He's been known to get banged up throughout his career, and so Cam Akers looked good in his limited opportunities on Sunday Night Football. And if he's supplanting Ty Chandler there for that backup running back slot, then, Cam Akers definitely, has to be in consideration for a spot at the end of your bench here. Moving on to the next guy I'm going to talk about is Buffalo running back Ray Davis, available in 79% of Yahoo leagues. Again, we talked about Ray Davis these last several weeks since that Jets game in week 5, but Ray Davis, or week 6 rather, but Ray Davis is a guy who, he did it again this weekend where he caught like a dump off pass from Josh Allen and he took off 60 something yards to the end zone. He just passes the eye test here, and it's only a matter of time, I feel like, until they start getting him more involved. But he's a guy that I think he's just too explosive, too big, too physical to not have a role essentially, eventually in this Buffalo Bills backfield. So for me, I'm going to prioritize Ray Davis as a guy that I need to have at the end of my bench. I might not even drop him because the James Cook manager, if you're not the James Cook manager, the James Cook manager probably really wants Ray Davis as security as we get, closer and closer to these fantasy playoffs, and they're trying to protect themselves from any potential injury. So he's a guy that once you drop him, I feel like the Ray Davis manager is going to scoop him up immediately. Moving on to the next guy, that's Atlanta running back Tyler Algier, available in 61% of Yahoo leagues. Again, he does have some. I think there's opportunities for him in matchups that you expect Atlanta to win big, and so they're playing a team that has a poor run defense or is bad against opposing running backs. Then Tyler Algier can be a spot start there for you. But at the end of the day, he's most valuable if there's some kind of injury to Bijan Robinson in Atlanta there. So moving on to Denver, and we've got two Denver running backs there for you. The first one is a new name we haven't really talked about, but that's Denver running back Audric Estime, available in 99% of Yahoo leagues. Estime is a rookie running back. He came out of training camp. I think he had gotten banged up in training camp, but he basically returned from injury like 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they've slowly been giving him a little bit more work, and he's been efficient on his carries. I mean, he's been averaging, I think, over 5 or 6 yards per carry there when they have given him opportunities. And Javonte Williams, his yards per carry hasn't been very good these last couple games. And Sean Payton was asked about whether Estime would get more work, and he, said, yeah, that that could happen. That's something that might happen. And so Estime is a guy that I think we should look to adding to the end of our benches here, so that we can potentially leverage, if there's a change of the guard here at the running back position for the Denver Broncos. Moving on to his teammate, that's Denver running back Jaleel McLaughlin, available in 83% of Yahoo leagues. As Denver is going to find themselves in some potential negative game scripts like they could this week when they play the Kansas City Chiefs, McLaughlin, I think, adds some value there. And, if something does happen to Javonte Williams in terms of an injury, then it becomes a two-man backfield between Estime and McLaughlin. I don't think McLaughlin would take on much of the work as we've talked about in the past, but he would. I think they would include him in a lot more passing down looks and some of their outside runs as well. So McLaughlin is a guy that I think deserves a look at a roster spot. And then moving on to my favorite guy to talk about in this segment, that's Miami running back Jalen Wright, available in 94% of Yahoo leagues. I don't feel like I need to say much more about Jalen Wright because I've said so many things about him, and Miami continues to not involve him so much into their offense, even though he's probably one of their more explosive players, which is very tough to say when you have a team with basically a track team out there with, Devon Achane and Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, who's usually on one leg. But Raheem Mostert, a little bit older. I think Jalen Wright, you could make the case that at this stage in his career is definitely the more explosive player. So again, doesn't require to be on your roster for the entire week. Just a guy you throw at the end of your bench and at the 1 o'clock games. And then when the 4 o'clock games hit, you go and you add a guy like Blake Corum, right? LA running back Blake Corum, available in 84% of Yahoo leagues. Again, he's a guy that, rookie draft pick. He's not going to see any work unless there's an injury to Kyren Williams. He's played very sparingly. So Blake Corum is, one of those guys that, again, you just add before the 4 o'clock games kick off or the Sunday night game kicks off. And then if no injury happens to Kyren Williams or nothing happens, you go ahead and you drop Blake Corum. And then you can add a guy like Trey Benson, right? Actually, Trey Benson did get a little bit more opportunity. So did Amari DeMarcado, but we're going to focus on Trey Benson a little bit. Available in 84% of Yahoo leagues. Arizona running back Trey Benson, that is. James Conner, he is the workhorse in Arizona, but we did see Trey Benson get a little bit more work this week. And you could say, oh, that was game script, but it seemed to be something that was happening early in the game. Even scored his first career touchdown in this game. So it seemed like there was like a point of emphasis to get Trey Benson involved, which is really good because Trey Benson was one of the top running back prospects coming out of the draft this year. He was my number 2 running back um, behind Jonathan Brooks. So Trey Benson is a guy that if you give him these opportunities, eventually he will make something happen with them because he's just that talented. He's a big, explosive running back, and so if something does happen to James Conner, which we never hope or pray for injuries, but if something does happen to James Conner, I have no doubt that Trey Benson would be a very, 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 very valuable fantasy asset as we move towards the fantasy playoffs here. Moving on to the wide receiver position, and I know he's below the 50% threshold in terms of availability, but I just have to bring him up because he's still too widely available in my opinion, and that's Cleveland wide receiver Cedric Tillman. He's available in 42% of Yahoo leagues. Again, we only bring up guys typically that are in the 50% range, but Tillman needs to be rostered. He's clearly a thing. I've talked about him ad nauseum for 2+ weeks now, and I'm definitely a believer. So I'm telling you guys, if you are in that 42% or he is available in your league, you have to get him on your roster. I would drop a Keenan Allen in a heartbeat, Michael Pittman Jr. in a heartbeat. Um, yeah, I can't think of any other names that I would drop at this moment. But if you have some guys that you are like, hey, I'm holding on to this guy, is Tillman worth their roster spot? Feel free to send those questions over, and I'll be more than happy to answer them. But Cedric Tillman needs to be rostered. Moving on to the next wide receiver on this list, and that is LA Chargers wide receiver Quentin Johnston, available in 84% of Yahoo leagues. Johnston had missed the previous 2 games due to an ankle injury and came back to score 22 PPR points against Cleveland on Sunday. Not surprised one bit. I've always been in the minority of folks that actually like Johnston, but when you consider the matchups he has coming up alongside his quarterback in Justin Herbert, Johnston should be able to come through on some big plays in the Chargers offense over these next several weeks here. And now we got a little dirty, right? So moving on to the next wide receiver, we've got Washington wide receiver Noah Brown. He's available in 98% of Yahoo leagues. Noah Brown was known for making the Hail Mary catch 2 Sundays ago, to win that game for the Commanders over the Chicago Bears. But now we finally have some separation here in the wide receiver 2 role behind Terry McLaurin. Brown now has 3 games with at least 6 targets in his last 4 games, clearing 50+ receiving yards in each of those games. He provides some low-end wide receiver 3 value and could be a potential bye week fill-in when duty calls. So definitely a guy that I would look to add. There's not much upside here, but Washington's a good offense. They are looking desperately for that number 2 wide receiver, and I think Noah Brown has locked that down there for them. So moving on to the next wide receiver on this list, that is Carolina wide receiver Xavier Legette, available in 73% of Yahoo leagues. Now, I'm not overly in love with this pickup, mainly just because if you take away the touchdowns from each of the last 2 weeks, we're looking at 4 catches for about 30+ receiving yards, which doesn't amount to much in PPR scoring. Not to mention, Adam Thielen can come back and take even more opportunities away. And then obviously there's the quarterback situation there. But if you need help at the position or you're looking for some upside, there could be worse places to look than at the talented first round rookie pick for the Carolina Panthers there. And then two other guys that I did not write up, but will mention on the show here. San Francisco wide receivers, Ricky Pearsall, available in 72% of Yahoo leagues. And then there's Jon Jennings, available in about 50% of Yahoo leagues. So we don't know what Deebo Samuel's status is. And obviously they've, have some injuries at the wide receiver position with Brandon Ayuk being out. But they play Tampa Bay, and Tampa Bay just gives it up to quarterbacks, to give it up to opposing pass catchers. And so if either one of these two guys, I mean, Jon Jennings, I feel like is going to have a role regardless of what happens with Deebo Samuel. But I think Ricky Pearsall, if Deebo Samuel is forced to miss any time, Ricky Pearsall, then his role becomes elevated as well. But yeah, so those two guys I would definitely take a look at, depending on what the situation is with Deebo Samuel. Moving on to the tight end position, let's talk about Cincinnati tight end Mike Gesicki. He's available in 87% of Yahoo leagues. It seems that Gesicki's big weeks tend to coincide with T. Higgins being out of the lineup, as he tends to operate as the number 2 option in those situations. On a short week, as the Bengals play Thursday night, that might just be the case again. So we're going to have to, monitor Higgins' availability here as we get closer to Thursday. But not to mention as well that rookie tight end Eric All Jr., he's out for the year with a torn ACL. So that could even lead to more opportunities potentially here if Higgins doesn't make it back, or even if Higgins does make it back, I should say. And so with a matchup against Baltimore this week, I'd have to imagine that Gesicki brings back some tight end 1 value this week. And again, widely available, 87% of Yahoo leagues, caught 2 touchdown passes this past weekend. So yeah, I would definitely be looking to Mike Gesicki here if I needed some help at the tight end position. Moving on to the next tight end on this list, that's New England tight end Hunter Henry. He's available in 64% of Yahoo leagues. With Drake May back in the lineup, Henry was productive once again, seeing 8 targets from the rookie. He'll continue to see a key role in the offense as long as May stays in the lineup here, I would imagine. And then moving on to the last guy we're going to talk about today, that is Carolina tight end Jatavian Sanders, available in 99% of Yahoo leagues, making his way back to the waiver wire list. He was banged up last week, which probably could have attributed to the down week that he had, but he's had at least 5 targets and 49 receiving yards in 3 of his last 4 games. So as I've said before when we talked about Sanders, I'm willing to bet on the talent here, especially at the tight end position, and Sanders is as talented as they come. So guys, that is all I got for the Week 10 waiver show. Make sure you are tapped in. Make sure you're following me at @TheRealJonJ_FF. Make sure you're following the show at FF Diagnostics. Make sure you are plugged in and subscribed everywhere you get your podcast, or whether you're watching live on YouTube, Twitch, Instagram, X. Just make sure you are following the show, following the account. And we'll see y'all on Friday for the matchup show. Until next time, y'all, have a good one, and we're out of here. Peace.